All right, today we're going to conduct a sort of checkup on the world's largest economy. We're going to explore its absolutely massive scale, dissect what makes it tick, and try to diagnose its overall health. So, is this giant really as robust as it seems? Let's dive in and find out.
Let's just start with a number. And honestly, it's a number that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. $30.6 trillion. That's the projected value of everything the US is going to produce in 2025. I mean, think about it this way. If you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 83,000 years to get through that much cash. So what does a number this massive actually mean for the world?
Well, to really get a sense of the scale, look at this. The US economy isn't just the biggest, it's actually larger than the next three biggest economies. That's China, Germany, and Japan combined. It is, without a doubt, a global titan. And you better believe its performance sends ripples across the entire planet.
Okay, so we've established the US is a $30 trillion titan. Got it. But how is all of that value actually created? Let's look inside the engine. Yeah, let's pop the hood and really look at the engine itself. What are the key parts, the sectors and industries that are actually powering this whole machine?
You know, you might picture giant factories and sprawling farms as the backbone of an economy. But in the US, the reality is pretty different. Over 80% of the entire economy is driven by the services sector. We're talking about everything from the software on your phone and the movie you just streamed to your morning coffee and your annual doctor's checkup. Industry and agriculture are still vital for sure, but they're a much, much smaller piece of this modern economic pie.
And within these sectors, you find one of the economy's biggest strengths, its incredible diversity. The US is a leader in super cutting-edge fields like high-tech and aerospace, but it's also an absolute powerhouse in healthcare, finance, and even traditional manufacturing like motor vehicles. It's this mix of the old and the new that creates such a resilient and dynamic economic landscape.
So what's fueling all this production? What's keeping the engine running? Well, the answer, by a huge margin, is the American consumer. A staggering 68% of the entire US economy is driven by people like you and me buying stuff. This makes the US not just a production powerhouse, but the largest and most influential consumer market on the entire planet. And who are all these consumers? They are the 168.1 million people who make up the American labor force, the human engine driving all of this activity, from stocking shelves to writing code. But here's the thing. While the economy they power is enormous, what does that economy actually look like for the average person working inside of it?
And that question is the perfect bridge to our next section. We're going to zoom way in from that 30,000-foot view of GDP right down to the kitchen table to the financial reality on the ground for the average American household.
And right away, we see a really crucial distinction. On one side, you've got median income. That's what a typical household earns in a year. But on the other side is median net worth. That's what a household actually owns after you subtract all the debts, mortgages, car loans, all of it. That gap right there between earning and owning is so key to understanding the financial pressures a lot of Americans are facing.
This concentration of wealth is, well, it's one of the defining features of the modern US economy. Back in 2016, the top 1% of households controlled nearly 40% of the entire nation's wealth. Meanwhile, the bottom 50%, that's half the country, held just a tiny, tiny fraction of it. This kind of imbalance really shapes everything, from economic opportunity all the way to political power.
And this quote, I think, really puts a human face on all that data. 8 out of 10 US workers live paycheck to paycheck. I mean, just think about that. For a huge majority of working Americans, that gap between income and wealth means they're in a constant state of financial precarity, where wages just aren't keeping up with the rising cost of, well, everything. And for millions, that financial pressure is way more acute. Inside this $30 trillion economy, you have almost 13% of the population living below the poverty line. A really stunning 44% of kids are in low-income homes. And a UN report even found over 5 million people living in conditions of deep poverty. This is the other side of the economic giant. So, this all leads us to the major structural challenges, the big pressure points. Because an economy this large doesn't just have individual hardships, it also has to deal with massive, system-wide problems. The 21st century so far has been marked by one profound economic shock after another. From the dot-com bust at the turn of the century to the global financial crisis in 2008, and then the unprecedented pandemic shutdown in 2020, the economy has been tested again and again, and every one of those events has left some lasting scars.
And then there's this other persistent pressure point, This number, as of 2024, that is the U.S. national debt. It's just an astronomical figure, and it represents a really significant long-term challenge for the country's financial health.
But what does a number like that even mean in the real world? Well, it means the national debt is now significantly larger than the country's entire annual economic output. A debt-to-GDP ratio over 100% is, well, for a lot of economists, that's a flashing warning light, suggesting the country owes more than it produces in an entire year. And adding to all that financial pressure on households is a nationwide housing crisis. A severe shortage of available homes has pushed prices and rents up to levels that are simply out of reach for so many average workers, squeezing family budgets even tighter and making it that much harder to build any kind of wealth.
Okay, so after looking at its size, its engine, and its pretty serious pressure points, what's the prognosis? What does the future actually hold for this economic giant?
Well, one of the biggest factors shaping the future is the shifting global landscape. Sure, the U.S. economy is still growing, but its pace is much slower than that of emerging giants like China and India. Over the last quarter century, their economies have been expanding at triple the rate or even more, and that is fundamentally reshaping the global distribution of economic power.
But, and this is a big but, it would be a huge mistake to count this giant out. The U.S. still possesses these incredible, enduring strengths. It's still the world's primary consumer market, a global leader in research and innovation, and its currency, the U.S. dollar, is still the backbone of the entire global financial system.
So after our checkup, where do we land? What's the final diagnosis? We've seen its incredible size and power, but we've also seen some pretty significant underlying conditions. The final diagnosis is definitely complex. The U.S. economy is a picture of immense power and incredible innovation, but it's also an entity grappling with some serious symptoms. The heavy weight of high debt, the deep fractures of wealth inequality, and the steady rise of global competitors.
And all of that leaves us with one last crucial question. The core challenge for the United States isn't just about growing bigger, it's about growing better. So the real question is, how can the world's largest economy leverage its immense strengths to ensure its next chapter is prosperous not just for some, but for everyone?